He extended his coat to a trembling woman at the bus stop, unaware she was a CEO destined to transform his life. The wind sliced through New York like a knife, snow drifting steadily from a slate-gray sky, coating the sidewalks and muffling the city's usual clamor. At a nearly empty bus stop beneath a flickering streetlight, Ethan stood, shoulders hunched, in a tattered olive jacket, clutching a worn manila folder against his chest. Inside were 5 resumes, 5 quiet rejections. He exhaled, his breath clouding in the frigid air. 46, a former construction engineer, widower, father, and, for now, homeless. The reality settled on him heavily, like the snow gathering at his feet. A pharmacy sign nearby glowed red, blinking 8:41 p.m. The bus was late. Cold seeped through his threadbare boots. Then, through the snow, a woman emerged. She seemed in her 30s, dressed in a business skirt and blouse, no coat, her heels clicking on the pavement. Her wet hair stuck to her face, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She paused under the same awning, breath shallow, hands quivering. Ethan tried not to stare, but her presence was striking, polished, professional, yet visibly suffering in the cold. She rubbed her hands together, unable to warm them. He looked away. Just another night, just another bus to nowhere. But then the wind roared. She flinched, curling inward, and Ethan glanced at her again. His jacket wasn't much, but it was something. He could keep it, stay silent, blend into the crowd. But he didn't. Wordlessly, he slipped off the coat. The cold stung fiercely. He stepped toward her and offered it. Startled, she said, "You don't have to do that." Ethan gave a weary smile. "I've lost enough today. This coat, it's all I have left to give." She hesitated. "But you need it more than I do." Still, he gently placed it over her shoulders. "Not tonight." The warmth surprised her. It smelled of soap, perhaps coffee, comfort. She pulled it closer instinctively. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, folding his arms against the chill. They stood in silence as snow fell around them. After a moment, she turned to him. "What's your name?" "Ethan." "I'm Laura." "Nice to meet you, Laura." She glanced at him. "You shouldn't have given me your jacket." He smiled faintly. "Probably not, but I couldn't let you freeze." The low rumble of a bus broke the quiet. Headlights cut through the snow as it pulled up. Laura stepped toward it, then turned back. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Ethan shrugged. "Somewhere," he said, not mentioning it was the back seat of a rusted truck behind a warehouse. She reached into her purse and handed him a card. "If you ever need anything." He took it, slipping it into his folder without a glance. He didn't expect to use it. People often said such things. Most didn't mean them. Laura boarded the bus, glancing back once more, the coat wrapped around her like a shield. Ethan watched until the bus vanished into the snow. Alone again, he stood shivering, not from the cold, but from something else, something small, quiet, powerful. He looked up at the sky, then down at the empty street. "Maybe tomorrow," he whispered, then turned and walked into the night. Ethan trudged slowly through the silent back streets, snow crunching beneath his worn shoes. There was no rush, no one waiting, no lights left on in a window, just the familiar chill of his truck parked behind an old warehouse on the city's edge. He reached it just after 9. The old '98 Chevy was rusted, its heater long broken. Inside, the front seat held a nest of blankets, a pillow in the corner, and a lunchbox tucked under the dashboard. He climbed in, shut the door, and sat in silence. From the glove compartment, he retrieved a small tin box and opened it. Inside was a faded photo, his wife, Emma, smiling brightly, and their son, Jacob, around 7, with a crooked grin. "Good night, Emma," Ethan whispered. "Good night, Jacob." He leaned back, eyes on the ceiling, memories flooding over him. He had once been Ethan Miles, structural engineer, building schools, homes, hospitals. He had a wife who taught kindergarten, laughed often, even when life was tough. Their son had her laugh, joyful and unrestrained. They weren't wealthy, but they were happy. Then cancer struck. By the time it was diagnosed, it was stage 4. Emma was gone in 9 months. Ethan left his job to care for her. Afterward, everything unraveled. Bills mounted, savings vanished. He sold the house, moved with Jacob into smaller and smaller spaces until only the truck remained. Still, he tried to protect his son. He turned the back seat into a spaceship, canned soup into adventures, a parking lot into their backyard. Every morning, he walked Jacob to school, clean-shaven, shirt tucked in. "Why do you still cut your hair?" a shelter worker once asked. Ethan smiled. "Because my son needs to believe things can get better, and I need to look like I believe it too." He took any job he could find, moving furniture, fixing gutters, sweeping construction sites. It wasn't enough, but it kept them together until last fall. A social worker intervened, saying it wasn't safe, that Jacob needed stability. Ethan didn't argue. He knew they were right. Through tears, he signed the papers, hugged his son, and promised, "Just for now, I'll come back for you." Since then, every day was a struggle. He sent resumes, stood in job fair lines, attended free workshops, studied codes at the library. He was building a plan, slowly, quietly. Tonight, that plan felt more distant than ever, sitting in his cold truck, rubbing his arms for warmth. He thought of Laura, the woman at the bus stop, how cold she'd looked, how surprised when he offered his coat. He didn't know why he'd done it. Maybe she reminded him of Emma, or maybe he just needed to feel he could still do something good, that he was still the man who gave more than he took. Outside, the snow kept falling. Ethan pulled a blanket over himself, leaned against the cold window, and closed his eyes. He didn't have much, but he still had himself, and for now, that would have to suffice. Laura stepped into the sleek lobby of her apartment building, the warmth enveloping her like a soft embrace. The doorman greeted her with a polite nod, but she barely noticed. Her heels clicked softly on the marble floor as she headed to the elevator, still wrapped in the stranger's jacket. She hadn't meant to take it, had even tried to refuse, but Ethan had insisted with a look that silenced her protests. Now the jacket hung awkwardly on her, too large, worn, but warmer than anything she'd worn in years. She stepped into her penthouse on the 28th floor, greeted by silence. No TV, no music, no laughter, just the hum of appliances and the distant howl of wind through thick glass windows. Laura dropped her purse on the entryway table and began to remove the jacket when her fingers brushed something in the inner pocket. Curious, she pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn, creased, smudged with time. She unfolded it carefully. It was a child's drawing, done in crayon. 2 stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun, one labeled Dad, the other me. A small heart floated between them. At the bottom, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "I love you, Daddy." Jacob. Laura froze, staring at the drawing, the words blurring before her eyes. A tremor ran through her, and she sank onto the edge of her couch, jacket in one hand, picture in the other, her throat tightening. Jacob. The name lodged in her mind like a splinter. The way Ethan had clutched the folder, the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight in his voice, it all clicked. This wasn't just a man who'd given her his coat. This was a father, carrying a piece of his child close to his heart, a father with nothing who still chose to give. She looked around her apartment, immaculate, high ceilings, designer furniture, glass walls, not a single photo or personal touch. A space built for success, not warmth. Laura folded the drawing gently, and placed it on her lap. Then, without thinking, she pulled the coat close, hugging it tightly. It still smelled faintly of something familiar, maybe detergent, maybe memory. And suddenly, tears welled up. She hadn't cried in years, not since she was a girl, cold and hungry, sitting on church steps, hoping someone would notice. That night, someone had, a man with kind eyes and a weathered face. He'd taken off his coat, wrapped it around her, and said little, just smiled and told her she'd be okay. It was the first kindness she remembered, the first time she felt seen. She never saw him again, but that moment changed everything. Laura sniffed, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. She wasn't that girl anymore. She'd fought her way out of foster care, worked through college on scholarships and grit, built Infinity Group from a single app idea into one of the East Coast's most influential tech companies. She'd earned every dollar, every accolade. But somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten what it meant to give. Tonight, a stranger reminded her. She looked again at the drawing, at the shaky heart between the stick figures, then at the coat. Too big, too worn, but heavy with meaning. And for the first time in years, Laura Langston cried. Not from brokenness, but because something inside her had been gently, beautifully cracked open. The next morning, Laura sat at her desk, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside her. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond her office's floor-to-ceiling windows, but her eyes were fixed on the crumpled drawing in her hand, its edges worn from being unfolded and refolded, as if she were memorizing every crayon stroke. She'd barely slept, replaying the night before. The way Ethan had given his only coat without hesitation, the quiet dignity in his voice, the sorrow he tried to conceal. Something about him lingered, not just his kindness, but the pain he carried so quietly. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small silver bell. Moments later, her assistant, Sarah, stepped in. "Yes, Miss Langston. I need you to help me find someone," Laura said, her tone calm but resolute. Sarah blinked. "Of course. Who?" Laura paused briefly. "His name is Ethan. No last name. He was at the 56th and Madison bus stop last night, around 8:30. He gave me his jacket. I want to find him." Sarah looked surprised but nodded. "I'll see what I can do. And, Sarah, this stays between us." Over the next few days, Laura's instructions were executed with quiet precision. Her team, accustomed to tracking elusive developers and poached executives, now focused on piecing together the life of a man who lived in the shadows. They pulled traffic camera footage from nearby intersections, spotting Ethan's blurred figure bundled in his jacket. They traced bus routes that stopped in that area around the time Laura boarded, cross-referencing entry logs to narrow down potential riders. None matched corporate databases. Finally, Sarah returned with a thin folder. "His name is Ethan Miles," she said. "Former structural engineer. No recent employment records. I found some online forum posts asking about job openings. He listed a contact number tied to a prepaid phone. No permanent address." Laura flipped through the pages. A copy of an old driver's license photo, a dormant LinkedIn profile, a scan of an expired construction license. No arrests, no scandals, just absence. Laura closed the folder. The silence in the room felt heavy. "Where is he now?" Sarah shifted. "One of our guys saw him yesterday, near the south end of the Bronx. There's an old pickup truck parked behind a warehouse. He's been seen coming and going, sleeping in it." Laura stood. "I want to go there." Sarah hesitated. "Laura, are you sure? We could arrange for someone to approach him or bring him here." "No," Laura interrupted. "This isn't a meeting. It's personal." Sarah said nothing, but her eyes softened. "I'll have someone drive you." An hour later, Laura sat in the back seat of a black sedan as it navigated streets far from boardrooms and glass towers. They passed shuttered storefronts, graffiti-covered walls, and people moving with heads down against the cold. The driver pulled up near the warehouse. Laura saw it immediately, the old Chevy, tucked in the shadows, snow piled around its tires. It looked like it hadn't moved in days. She stepped out into the chill, the air smelling of rust and damp concrete. Her heels crunched on gravel as she approached the truck. Through the windshield, she could just make out a figure in the front seat. As she drew closer, the door creaked open. Ethan stepped out, blinking in the daylight. He looked at her, first with confusion, then recognition, his expression shifting. Puzzlement, caution, then a hint of embarrassment. "Laura," he said, his voice rough with sleep and surprise. She offered a small, uncertain smile. "Hi, Ethan." He glanced at himself. Wrinkled clothes, snow-dusted boots, the truck behind him. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you," she said simply. He frowned, crossing his arms. "Why?" She hesitated. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about what you did, about the kind of person who gives his only coat to a stranger." Ethan gave a bitter laugh. "You didn't have to track me down for that. A thank you card would have done." "It's not about thanks," she said. "It's about not letting something good vanish without being seen." For a long moment, they stood in silence, two people from different worlds, brought together by an unlikely act in a bitter wind. Ethan finally exhaled. "You came all this way just for that?" Laura nodded. "Yes, and maybe something more." The next time Laura saw Ethan, he was working at a construction site on the edge of Queens, stacking cinder blocks with steady, silent focus. She'd waited in her car for 20 minutes, watching as he hauled, lifted, and stacked in the biting cold, his movements precise, efficient, purposeful, yet unnoticed by those around him. He wore a worn flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up despite the chill, his breath visible in the air. His hands were calloused, nails dirty, but his work was meticulous. When he took a break, sitting on a low wall with a plastic water bottle, Laura stepped out of the car and approached. Ethan looked up, did a double take, and stood quickly, brushing dust from his pants. "Laura." "Hi." She smiled, small but genuine. "Hi again." She handed him a cup of coffee she'd brought. "Thought you might like something warm." He took it hesitantly, his eyes searching hers. "You really didn't have to." "I know, but I wanted to." They stood in silence for a moment before she added, "Would you come with me, just for a bit? I'd like to show you something." Ethan glanced at his boots, then at the foreman in the distance. "I've still got a few hours on shift." "I already spoke to him," Laura said. "Told him you had an interview." His brows rose. "I don't have an interview." "You do now," she replied. Ethan let out a short laugh, more surprised than amused. "Okay, let's see what this is about." They drove in silence, Ethan glancing out the window, fidgeting, aware of his dusty jeans, rough hands, the faint sweat on his collar. Laura seemed unbothered. When they arrived at Infinity Group's downtown headquarters, Ethan paused in the marble-floored lobby, eyeing the massive glass walls, polished chrome, and bustling suits. "I don't belong here," he muttered. Laura turned to him. "Just come upstairs." They entered a private conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Laura offered him a seat, closed the door, and sat across from him. Ethan cleared his throat. "So, what's this about?" "Returning the coat." Laura shook her head. "No, I kept that. It's mine now." Ethan blinked. "Okay." She leaned forward. "I didn't come to thank you. I came because you made me remember something I'd forgotten. A version of myself buried under years of boardrooms and deadlines. You reminded me that real change doesn't always start with innovation or strategy. Sometimes it starts with kindness." Ethan looked down. "Laura, I'm just a guy trying to survive. And that's exactly why I brought you here. She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a job proposal, a contract, a new role, cultural and human values advisor. Ethan frowned as he flipped through the pages. What is this? It's a new position, one I created. Someone who sits in on department decisions, training programs, development discussions, not to talk numbers or strategy, but people, values, compassion. You'd share your experiences, help shape the heart of this company. Ethan laughed awkwardly, shaking his head. Laura, look at me. I don't have a psychology degree. I didn't go to Harvard. I sleep in a truck. You were an engineer. I haven't built anything in years. You built a moment I'll never forget, Laura said softly. Ethan looked away, overwhelmed. This isn't charity, she continued. This is a role only you can fill. You know what it's like to be invisible, to be passed over, and yet you stopped in the cold and gave your only coat to a stranger. That tells me more about leadership than any resume ever could. He opened his mouth, closed it, struggled for words. I'm not qualified, he said finally, voice low. Laura leaned forward, her gaze steady. You don't need a degree to teach people how to care, because you live it every day. She looked into his eyes. You don't need credentials to teach kindness, because you've lived it, and that's more powerful than anything you'll ever put on paper. Ethan's throat tightened. He stared at the proposal, then back at her, and for the first time in years, he felt something stir. Not fear, not defeat, but hope. Raw, unfamiliar, terrifying hope. Ethan sat alone on a bench outside the towering office building, the job proposal unopened in his lap. His fingers traced the folder's edges, but his eyes were unfocused, lost in the busy street. He couldn't do it. Deep down, he wanted to, but fear held him tight, whispering familiar doubts. She's just being kind. This isn't real. You'll fail. You always do. The offer felt like a trap wrapped in generosity. Ethan, who'd learned to distrust anything too good to be true, couldn't shake the doubt. He didn't notice Laura step out of the building and sit beside him until she spoke softly. You haven't opened it. Ethan gave a dry chuckle. Didn't think I needed to. I already know how this ends. Laura tilted her head. How? Someone like me doesn't end up in a place like this. You don't build a company like Infinity by hiring people who sleep in trucks. You think I made you an offer out of pity? I think I don't belong in your world. Laura looked ahead for a moment, then stood. Come with me. Just for an hour. Laura, no suits, no meetings. Just trust me. Against his instincts, he stood. They drove in silence for over 30 minutes, away from the city's gleaming towers into a quieter neighborhood. They pulled up in front of a modest red brick building with a faded green awning. A painted sign read, Samuel's Place, a safe space for every child. Ethan followed her inside. The walls were bright, covered in handprints, painted animals, and quotes about kindness. The air smelled of crayons and warm bread. Children's laughter echoed down the hall, high, joyous, unfiltered. Laura led him past a community kitchen and reading room into a wide playroom filled with secondhand toys and handmade posters. Kids of all ages sprawled across the floor, building puzzles, reading, playing. This place, Laura said quietly, was named after the man who saved me. Ethan looked at her. I grew up in foster homes, bounced around. Some were kind, some weren't. One night, I ran away. I was 12, freezing, curled up outside a church, waiting for morning. She paused, her voice softening. He found me, an old man named Samuel. He gave me his coat, sat with me all night. Didn't ask questions, just stayed. Ethan didn't speak. He couldn't. I never saw him again, Laura continued. But that moment, it was like someone reached into the darkness and said, You matter. I built this place because of him. She turned to face Ethan fully. And last week, someone else gave me a coat. Didn't know who I was. Didn't ask for anything. Just gave. Ethan swallowed hard. You remind me of him, she said. Not because of what you gave, but because of who you are. They stood in silence, surrounded by the sounds of life and laughter. Ethan's eyes wandered across the room. Children playing, a volunteer tying a shoelace, a young boy reading aloud with too much energy. It felt warm, real. Laura touched his arm gently. I don't need you to fit in a boardroom, Ethan. I need you to remind people of this, of what it means to care. Ethan didn't respond with words. His eyes were wet now. He looked down, trying to blink the tears away, but they came anyway, quiet, unguarded tears. And then he nodded, not for the job, not for the salary or title, but because, for the first time in years, he felt it. He was still needed, still useful, still human. Ethan stood motionless in the center of a room filled with joy and laughter, a single tear trailing down his weathered face, not from sorrow, but from the profound relief of realizing he still mattered. Ethan's first day at Infinity Group was understated. No welcome party, no press release, just a quiet meeting in a small glass-walled room on the 5th floor with a few skeptical department heads and a stack of sticky notes. Laura introduced him simply. This is Ethan Miles. He's here to help us build something more meaningful than profit. The looks were polite but uncertain. But Ethan didn't waver. He began by sharing his story, not a dramatic version, not for headlines, just honest fragments. What it felt like to lose everything, to wake in a freezing truck, to walk into interviews knowing your shoes had holes, to choose kindness anyway. At first, they listened with cautious interest. By the end of the week, they were leaning forward. Ethan had a way of speaking that didn't preach or perform. He asked questions that made people pause. When was the last time you truly looked someone in the eye? Do you know the name of the janitor who cleans this floor? What would you do if you saw someone crying in the break room? He didn't bring charts or data. He brought empathy. Slowly, a shift began. Employees started seeking him out. First interns, then junior developers, then department heads. Some came to talk about stress, others burnout. A few just sat quietly during lunch. Ethan listened, and when he spoke, he didn't offer solutions. He offered perspective. You're not broken, he told a young programmer who confessed he hadn't slept in 3 days. You're just tired. Being tired doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've cared too long without someone caring back. That line ended up taped to office doors, printed on mugs, quoted in company emails. Laura watched it unfold from her corner office, seeing breakroom chatter change, laughter return, productivity rise. Not from pressure, but because people felt seen. Soon, Ethan had his own space, small, cozy, filled with plants, secondhand books, and a coffee pot that never emptied. Outside of work, life began to rebuild in quiet, meaningful ways. With Laura's help and a small housing stipend from the company, Ethan put a down payment on a modest one-bedroom house on the edge of Brooklyn. It wasn't grand, but it had a porch, a garden plot, and walls that didn't shake in the wind. More importantly, it had room for Jacob. Now in his first year at a local university, Jacob moved back in with his father. Their first dinner in the new house was simple, spaghetti and garlic bread, but Ethan would remember it forever. You kept your promise, Jacob said that night, tearing up. Ethan couldn't answer, not with words, but the look in his eyes said everything. As for Laura, she and Ethan saw each other nearly every day. At first, it was work, meetings, strategies, collaboration. Then, without effort, it became more. They shared lunches, then subway walks, then weekend coffees that turned into evenings watching old movies, talking about everything and nothing. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It just happened. Two people who'd built armor around themselves found comfort in the quiet presence of someone who asked for nothing but presence. One late afternoon, on the rooftop of the building, watching the sunset behind the skyline, Laura said softly, "You've changed this place, Ethan." He chuckled. "No, I just reminded them what they already knew." She looked at him. "And reminded me too." Ethan had just finished a workshop on resilience when a young man lingered after the others left. He looked no older than 22, skinny, pale, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. "I just wanted to say something," he said, voice trembling. "Last month, I was going to quit. Everything, life, I mean. I was done. But then I heard you speak, and it stopped me." Ethan stood still, heart pounding. "You said something about how people don't need to be fixed, they just need to be heard. No one had ever said that to me before. It felt like someone finally saw me." The young man swallowed hard. "If it weren't for you, I don't think I'd be here." Ethan's chest tightened. He stepped forward, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "I'm really glad you are." After the young man left, Ethan sat in his chair, the room suddenly quiet, the words echoing in his mind. He'd once wondered if he'd ever matter again. Now he had his answer. The atrium of Infinity Group had never looked like this. Gone were the banners of quarterly achievements and product launches, replaced by soft white drapes, strings of warm lights, and a massive sign in elegant lettering, "One Kindness Day." Employees stood shoulder to shoulder, dressed in their best, not for business, but for something deeper. Laura Langston stepped to the podium, her eyes sweeping the room. "This day isn't about metrics," she began. "It's about moments." The room hushed. "A year ago, I stood at a bus stop in the freezing cold, alone, tired, more lost than I realized. Then a man I'd never met did something no one else had that night. He gave me his coat." A murmur of recognition rippled through the crowd. Laura smiled softly. It was old, worn, but it was everything, because it reminded me that kindness, real kindness, doesn't wait for convenience. It shows up when the world least expects it. She turned to an easel beside her, removing the cloth draped over it. There, behind glass, was the same coat, frayed at the sleeves, faded from years of use, preserved like something sacred. Beneath it, a bronze plaque read, "One small act of kindness can rewrite a life." Laura's voice wavered slightly. "That act didn't just change my night, it changed my life. Today, we honor not just that moment, but the man who made it possible." She turned to the stage's edge. "Ethan, will you come up here?" Ethan stood slowly from his seat, dressed in a simple, borrowed suit, pressed with care. He walked through the applause, his face still lined with time and hardship, now carrying something lighter, peaceful. He stepped beside her. Laura reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This belongs to you," she said. Ethan opened it. Inside was the deed to his new house, stamped and official. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Laura leaned in, smiling. No more sleeping in trucks. The room erupted in applause, but Ethan held up a hand. "I actually have something too," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, worn box, clearly cherished for years. He looked at Laura, heart pounding. "You said this coat changed your life, but you changed mine, gave me back my name, my son, a roof, and hope." He opened the box. Inside was a silver ring, not flashy, but shining quietly under the lights. "I kept it in the pocket," he said, voice trembling, "because if there's anything more valuable than this coat, it's you." Laura stared, eyes filling. "Laura Langston, will you marry me?" A moment of stillness. Then she laughed, a soft, choked, beautiful sound, and nodded through tears. "Yes, of course. Yes." The crowd rose in a standing ovation, cheers and claps echoing off the high glass ceiling. 1 month later, they were married. The wedding wasn't in a grand ballroom or five-star resort. It was at Samuel's place, the red brick community center that meant everything to them. Children made paper flowers. The chairs didn't match. The cake was baked by an intern from Ethan's mentorship program. But the room glowed with something money couldn't buy. Laura wore a simple white dress, her hair loose. Ethan wore that same suit. Jacob stood as best man. The guests were volunteers, co-workers, people from shelters, and young employees who'd once sat in Ethan's tiny office searching for purpose. During the vows, Laura held Ethan's hands, looking into his eyes. "Once, you gave me a coat," she said, voice clear and sure. "Tonight, I give you my whole life." Her words fell over the room like sunlight through stained glass, soft, radiant, unforgettable. Ethan couldn't speak. He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks as the crowd dabbed their eyes. Laughter followed, music played. The reception spilled into the courtyard, where children ran barefoot and fairy lights danced in the twilight. Someone snapped a photo. Ethan and Laura beneath the Samuel's Place sign, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her, and beside them, on an easel, the old coat, silent, worn, now immortalized. That image would circulate online, shared, reposted, talked about, a symbol of second chances, of how something as simple as kindness could reach into the cold and rewrite everything. Sometimes, the smallest gesture, a coat, a smile, a kind word, can echo further than we imagine. Ethan didn't have much, but he gave what he could. In return, he didn't just change Laura's life. He found love, purpose, and a new beginning. Their story reminds us, kindness doesn't require perfection, just presence, just heart. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that hope still lives in unexpected places, please like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Here, we tell tales that warm the heart, restore faith in humanity, and remind us what truly matters. Until next time, stay kind and keep believing.